My son-in-law's family pushed my daughter into the icy lake for fun. She hit her head and was about to drown. I screamed for help, but they only laughed. When the ambulance arrived, I called my brother and said, "Do what you have to do." But before we continue, if you haven't subscribed yet, do so to stay up to date with the most shocking and real stories happening around you. The air around Lake Tahoe that afternoon smelled of pine needles and cold metal, the kind of scent that made you shiver. Even when the sun was still out, I was sitting on the wide porch of the Whitman's Lake house pretending to enjoy the view, while my daughter Emily moved between the guests like a careful hostess. She was radiant in her cream sweater, polite, graceful, her laughter soft and practiced. From where I sat, I could tell it wasn't joy, it was survival. Charles Whitman, her father-in-law, sat at the head of the outdoor table, surrounded by men who laughed at his every word. He was the kind of man whose silence filled the room, whose confidence had the weight of money and habit. Grant, my son-in-law, mirrored him in everything. His posture, his tone, his easy arrogance. Watching them side by side was like watching a mirror of generations, power reproducing itself cold and without empathy. "Mom, come sit closer," Emily called out, waving at me from the table. I smiled and shook my head. "I'm fine here, sweetheart," I said. My voice was calm, but inside I was uneasy. Something about that place, the stillness of the water, the chill in the air, felt wrong, like a stage waiting for tragedy. They had invited me to celebrate family. That was what Charles called it, a weekend to bond, to show that Emily was now one of them. But to me, it looked more like a performance, a display of control. Every glass on the table gleamed too perfectly, every laugh sounded slightly forced, and the silence between jokes carried an edge I couldn't name. When Emily poured whiskey for her husband and his father Grant smiled at her, with that polished charm I had never trusted. "You see, Mom," he said, turning to me. "We take good care of her." I held his gaze and smiled politely, saying nothing. The wind from the lake brushed my face, cold and thin, and I had the sudden irrational thought that something terrible was about to happen. I didn't know yet that I was right. It started with laughter, the kind that sounds harmless, until you realize it was not. Charles and Grant had been drinking scotch since noon, and by sunset, their charm had curdled into something darker. The conversation turned into teasing, then taunting. Emily sat between them, trying to keep the peace with her quiet smile, the same one she used whenever she wanted to avoid conflict. "Come on, sweetheart," Grant said, his voice slurred, just enough to make every word sound cruel. "You used to swim in college, didn't you? Prove it. The lake's right there," his father chuckled. "Let's see if our city girl can handle a little cold water." Emily's face paled. "It's freezing, Charles. I'll get sick." "Oh, come on." He scoffed, a little swim-builds character. I set down my tea and stood. "That's enough," I said firmly. "She doesn't need to prove anything." Charles gave me a thin smile. "Relax, Miranda, we're just having fun." But it wasn't fun. It was a game when they played because they could. I watched Grant stand, his tall frame looming over Emily. He reached for her arm gently at first, then tighter. "Come on, don't be such a drama queen," he said. "Just a quick dip." Emily shook her head, nervous laughter bubbling up. "Grant, please don't let her go," I said again, louder this time. The laughter around the table died down, replaced by that heavy silence that always follows. Cruelty. Grant looked at me, his smile fading into a smirk. "You worry too much, Mom. She's fine." And before I could take another step, he and Charles grabbed Emily by the arms and pulled her toward the pier. I ran after them, my heart pounding so hard it drowned out everything else. "Stop, you're drunk, you'll hurt her." But my voice was nothing compared to their laughter, echoing off the water. Emily's cries turned from giggles to panic. "Grant, please," she screamed. Then I saw it happen, the shove, the splash, the sound of her body hitting the water. For a moment, everything froze. The lake swallowed her whole, its surface rippling once, twice, and then still. I screamed her name over and over, but she didn't come up. Grant and Charles stood there watching, unmoved. "She see and swim," Charles said casually, turning back toward the house. Don't be so dramatic. I pushed past them, staring at the black water for one horrifying second. Emily resurfaced, her face pale, a streak of blood trailing from her temple. Her eyes met mine, empty and frightened, before she sank again. My voice broke into a sound I didn't recognize. Raw and animal, help her, please, but they were already walking away laughing. See you at home, Mother, Grant called over his shoulder, and then they were gone, their car engine fading into the distance, leaving me alone with the cold, dark lake in the silence that followed. For a few seconds I couldn't move. The world had narrowed to the sound of water lapping against the pier and the image of bubbles rising where my daughter had disappeared. Then I saw a faint light flickering beyond the reeds, a small boat moving toward us. A man in a weathered jacket stood inside, scanning the water. I waved frantically, my voice breaking here over here. He turned the motor, the boat cutting through the water toward me. When he reached the pier, he didn't waste time asking questions. He could see everything he needed to in my face, where he said, I pointed to the spot there, she went under there. He killed the motor, grabbed a hook, and leaned dangerously close to the surface. For a moment I thought he might fall in himself. Then I saw fabric pale against the dark water. He hooked it, pulled and lifted Emily up with a strength that seemed impossible for one man. Her body was limp, her lips were blue. No, I whispered, my knees buckling. No, no, no. The man, Tom, as I later learned, checked for a pulse, then started pressing on her chest, his breath forming clouds in the freezing air as he gave her mouth to mouth. I forced my shaking hands to call 911. My voice was steady, though I didn't know how. Ambulance, Lake Tahoe Estates. Whitman property, head injury, hypothermia. When the paramedics arrived, red lights splashed across the water like fire. They worked quickly, lifting Emily onto a stretcher. RW. Wrapping her in foil blankets, I followed them until the ambulance doors closed, my reflection flickering in the glass window. An old woman with wild eyes and trembling hands. Then suddenly I felt something change inside me. The panic, the terror. It all went quiet. What replaced? It wasn't peace. It was clarity. Cold, sharp clarity. I pulled out my phone, scrolled through the names, until I found one I hadn't touched in over 10 years. Ben Cole. When he answered, his voice was rough, cautious. Miranda. I looked at the lake, at the spot where my daughter had vanished, and come back. My voice was low, steady. They're heading home now, I said. Do what you do best. I ended the call before he could respond. The sirens faded into the night, but inside me something had just begun. The hospital smelled like bleach and loneliness. I sat by Emily's bed, listening to the steady rhythm of the heart monitor. Her skin was pale, her lips dry, her hair still smelled faintly of lake water. Every few minutes I looked up, just to make sure her chest was still rising. The doctor said it was a miracle she survived. I didn't believe in miracles, not anymore. Outside, the night pressed against the windows, heavy and cold. I hadn't heard from Grant or Charles. Not a single call, not even a message, but sometime after midnight, a nurse walked in, carrying a large vase filled with white lilies, elegant, expensive, suffocatingly sweet. There was a note tucked between the petals. I opened it with trembling hands. Let's not turn a misunderstanding into a drama. Rest well. GW. I stared at the letters until they blurred. It wasn't an apology, it was a warning, dressed as civility. I folded the note, carefully slipped it into my coat pocket and whispered to the nurse, please throw these flowers away. My daughter's allergic to lilies. When the nurse left, I stepped out into the corridor, pulled out my phone and texted Ben. Make it hurt. Dot by morning, he called back. His voice was calm, low, the kind of voice people use when they're already deep into something D. Angerous. You were right to call me, he said. I started digging. Do you remember the name Malcolm Pierce? I didn't. He was Charles Whitman's partner 22 years ago. They went fishing together one night on this same lake. Only Charles came back. The police called it an accident. He paused, but there was a detective, Ron Healy, who handled the case. I found him. He admitted he was paid to close it fast. There was evidence, a business dispute, threats, a missing share transfer. The air in my lungs turned to stone. Charles didn't just build his empire on money, Ben said he built it on blood. I looked back through the glass window at Emily, lying there so small and fragile beneath the machines. The same lake had taken a man's life 22 years ago, and now it had tried to take hers. It wasn't fate, it was a pattern, and it was time to break it. 2 days later, the world began to shift. Ben called again, his voice rough from sleepless nights. I've got everything he said. Documents, witness statements, recordings, the detective's confession. Even the son of Malcolm Pierce kept, the letters his father wrote before he died. It's all there? I didn't ask how he found it all so fast. I knew Ben when he hunted the truth. He didn't stop until it bled. At the hospital, I spent my hours reading to Emily from an old collection of Chekhov's stories, my voice steady, my heart elsewhere between the pages. I thought of Charles Whitman sitting in his mansion, certain that his money could bury anything, even the past. I wondered how long it would take before he realized he was wrong. That night while Emily slept, I went down to the hospital library. It was small and dusty, forgotten by most visitors. I used to be a librarian. Books had always been my way of restoring order to chaos. I began to tidy the shelves, aligning the spines, brushing off years of dust. It calmed me, that quiet ritual. Even as the storm I'd set in motion gathered strength beyond those walls, at dawn Ben sent me a link. It's up, he said simply. The headline read, Drowned Twice in the same lake, the 22-year history of Whitman's empire. The article was long cold, surgical names, dates, letters, the confession, the photographs. Not one word of anger, just facts stacked like stones. It spread like wildfire, first local, then national within hours. Reporters swarmed the Whitman estate. The phones at their offices rang without end. Stock partners withdrew. Every news channel played the same footage. Charles Whitman's car behind the gates, silent and still. I watched the morning, light creep across the hospital floor, and for the first time in years, I exhaled without shaking. Justice didn't always wear a robe. Sometimes it wore the face of an old man, typing in the dark, driven by truth and vengeance in equal measure. As the sun rose higher, I whispered to myself, let the world read what he buried, and the world did. By evening, chaos had swallowed the Whitmans. Every television screen showed their faces. Charles tried to call his old political allies, the same ones he had once fed, contracts and favors no one picked up. His empire, built on fear and silence, had turned against him. People who had laughed at his jokes yesterday now pretended not to know his name. Grant paced the marble floors of their mansion, still in disbelief it's a smear campaign. He kept saying they can't prove anything, but his voice shook and his hands wouldn't stay still. Charles stood by the window, his reflection pale and unfamiliar. For the first time, he looked like an old man. When Ben told me all this later, I could picture it, the panic, the shouting, the desperation. But I didn't need to see it. I could already feel it from miles away. It was in the air, heavy and electric, like the moment before a thunderstorm breaks. That night, I stayed in the hospital library again. The air smelled of paper and dust. I sorted the books one by one, returning each to its rightful shelf. History with history, fiction with fiction. It was a quiet kind of justice, a reflection of what was happening outside those walls. Ben called close too. Oh, midnight. His voice was steady, but there was satisfaction beneath it. They tried to send someone after me. He said 4 men, unmarked cars, but they went to the wrong address. They kicked down the door of a vacant apartment. Every neighbor recorded it. The video's already online. I smiled faintly, not out of joy, but understanding you knew they'd try. I counted on it. He replied, people like Charles don't know any language but force. Outside the window, rain began to fall over the city, soft. At first, then heavier. I imagined it washing over the Whitman estate, over their polished cars and their perfect lawns. They'll come apart now. Ben said piece by piece. I looked toward the IQ where Emily slept. Let them, I said. It's time they learn how it feels to drown. By the end of the week it was over, the Whitman name had fallen from marble to mud. Charles and Grant were both arrested, Charles for obstruction and financial fraud, Grant for attempted murder. The cameras caught them being LED out of their home, faces blank, suits wrinkled, the arrogance stripped away. Their world had collapsed, not with a bang, but with the quiet hum of justice doing its work. I didn't watch the coverage. I didn't need to. The story had already ended for me. The moment I called my brother, everything after that was just the echo. Emily recovered slowly. The doctor said she'd heal fully, though the scar on her temple would remain. When she was strong enough to walk, she asked me one question. Did he call? I met her eyes. He sent flowers. I said simply, white lilies. Her lips trembled, but she didn't cry. I see, she whispered. That was the moment I knew she was done loving him. 2 weeks later, she signed the divorce papers. No lawyers, no shouting, just a single signature that severed years of illusion. Grant tried writing her letters from jail, pages filled with regret and hollow declarations of love. She read one, then tore it into small pieces and handed them to me. "Would you throw this away?" she asked. I nodded, though she'd already done it hers. Elf. We spent the next month packing boxes. The house she'd shared with Grant felt empty, haunted by too many memories that didn't belong to her anymore. The last box was labelled "Books Handle with Care." She smiled faintly at her own handwriting. "I think I get that from you," she said. When everything was ready, I pulled a small set of keys from my coat. "I bought back our old apartment," I told her. "The one near the library where she'd grown up. The floors creak, but the walls still stand." Emily took the keys, eyes glistening. "Then let's go home, Mom." And for the first time in years, that word home felt real again. The apartment was smaller than I remembered, but it felt alive. The sunlight came through the same cracked window panes, landing on the same worn hardwood floors as Emily unpacked boxes. Laughter, real laughter, echoed through the rooms. It had been so long since I'd heard that sound, not the polite, restrained laughter she used to give the Whitmans, but something lighter, honest and free. I stood by the window watching her hang curtains that fluttered in the soft breeze for a moment. The years of fear and silence seemed to melt away. Everything we had lost no longer mattered as much as what we had reclaimed. People sometimes think revenge is loud, filled with shouting sirens or gunfire, but real revenge, the kind that restores balance, is quiet. It's a truth whispered at the right moment, a single phone call that turns arrogance into accountability. I never screamed, I never threatened. I simply told the truth and let it do the work for me. When Emily sat beside me that evening, she took my hand and said, "You saved me." I shook my head. "No, sweetheart, you saved yourself. I just cleared the water so you could see what was underneath." We watched the sunset fade behind the city skyline, the colours soft and forgiving, for the first time in a long time. I didn't feel old, I felt finished, like a story that had finally found its last page. Thank you for watching this video. Share your thoughts in the comments. I truly value every story and every voice. Don't forget to subscribe to Tears and Strength and share this video with your friends.